filmmakers, women, leaders. Michelle, we learned a little bit about you just now and your film, and we're going to see the screening of your film very shortly. So we thought we'd have a little bit of a conversation about how this all started. So if I could just start out with what inspired you to work on memory loss. I think we kind of got that from you a little bit. But as an artist, sort of what intrigued you about the topic and how did you get started? So maybe we'll take it.
Sure, yeah. Just for an individual who has it, but also interpersonal relationships. What that does to a family, what that does to a bond. And I was really interested in exploring that. I was also just interested because my dad was really young when he got dementia. He did not resemble a lot of the media's imagery about people with dementia, putting ourselves into. And I just didn't really see any need. A grown child who maybe isn't a primary caregiver, but is, involved in something that could be shared with families. As we know, this thing is everywhere. And so many people, it's going to touch so many people's lives. And so I wanted to make something that people who are in my generation could have these conversations about what it means to have aging parents.
That's awesome. One of the things I thought we should talk about a little bit is because you have made a documentary film and you have created a fiction film. Those are very different things. And when you're thinking about how to tell a story of dementia artistically, did you ever consider sort of making a fictionalized version? Did you ever think about making a documentary? Because you've made 3 documentaries or more. How do you think about that as sort of the medium of telling the story, one versus the other? Because they're very, very different in film.
Well, I think there's a big question around consent in doing this work, and so and it's an ongoing process. So with doing documentary work, with Irene, it was an ongoing process of, are we in? Are you comfortable? Is this? But she was so clearly, she was so enamored with the camera, and there was such love between the two of us. And I really think of documentary film as friendship. So it feels like a camera's an excuse to have a conversation with someone. Away from doing a documentary about somebody in the later stages. Dementia, I'd say in the earlier stages. But it's also, it's just really tricky because you don't want to, I don't know, there's so many ethical issues around doing that work. But I also think that I didn't go in thinking I was going to make a film with Irene. We had 500 hours by the time. It took me 15 years to make this film. I was there when Irene died. I was her primary care partner. It was not, didn't cross a line, but it was still like, can I put this out in the world? And decided that yes, we could. But so I think in those situations, it is easier to tell the story that you need to tell through a narrative lens. That would be my.
This question of ethics has come up repeatedly in many, many, many conversations, and many artists actually will share that when they start to show their work, they'll show it to rooms of people, and that's often the first question they're asked, like, did you have consent? Was this ethical? I'm not so sure, and they've actually found it very challenging, which I was surprised by. I'm curious, when you make a narrative film, it's partially autobiographical. There's a little bit of consent issues around your own family.
Yeah.
How do you think about that? We've had some interesting conversations about that, so I don't know if you'll share a little bit that journey.
Yeah, no, for sure. This was my first narrative or fiction film that I've ever made, and my dad had a very, very different relationship to the camera than Irene, it seems. And I think consent is a huge issue in documentary and in personally adapted fiction. But especially in documentary work, I always want relationships to be consensual. And I think, both where he was at in his in the disease, but also his disinterest in the camera. He didn't come alive in front of the camera like Irene did. and even expressed at times really a disinterest in being around a camera at all. And I knew that the story I wanted to tell, I couldn't recreate because it was something that happened to us, so that's not something I could sort of like recreate. I guess I could have used him to stage it, but all of that felt so unethical to me based on our relationship. So there was really never a question that I would write it and recreate it with actors. I think the question of consent, of like the autobiographical components of it, and that was really interesting, of like sharing the drafts of the script with him along the way and getting his feedback, sharing it with my mom, sharing it with my brother, getting their consent to sort of actually go forward with the project. My dad's only concern was, this makes me just giggle because this is where his mind was at this time. It's also sort of his person didn't really understand the arts in the same way, but he was like, hey, I want to be sure you actually wrote this yourself. Like, you're not copying anything, right? And I'm like, oh my God. So I wasn't as worried. That was his big flag for the script. But yeah, I think consent it's really sticky. I've seen films put out by family members of people with dementia, Alzheimer's, and I wouldn't have made the same choices that they make, because I think it's hard at a certain point with people to get consent if your mind is changing rapidly. Yeah.
I think that enthusiastic consent is the big thing, and for me, I think it has to be a collaboration. So I'm working with someone now who is a poet who has early onset Alzheimer's and aphasia, and he's losing language, and we meet every week, and he's become, I've become very close with him. And he did not respond to the camera in the same way, but he really wanted to write. So it's also like but the idea is it's still a collaboration. And he's we record our Zoom sessions, and then I play them back for him. So there's something about classifications that are so invisibilizing, and when you're not. Irene watched a rough cut of, that's me, and enough of that, enough of these old white men, that she said to me. So nothing against old white men at all, or anything. So not that you're old, but no.
Mark,
I hope to be kicked out of a film one day. Let's talk a little bit about sort of working with folks in the dementia community, and a little bit about working with the dementia community itself. Sometimes people come to us and say, we want to create art about the community, we want to try things, we want to do a dance program here and there. Can you find us people, right? Can you find us senior centers? Can you find us older adults in the community? Can you find us a nursing home population? Can you find us? Can you give us funding? We want to work with experts. What has been your experience sort of trying to navigate these pieces of work through the dementia community? And there's a lot of artists in the room, there are filmmakers in the room, there are also similar projects trying to figure that out. Obviously, Katie applied for our award. Like, how is it working with is our community ready? Are they hungry for these things? I mean, I asked the audience to chime in. So what are your thoughts about sort of where you see us? I look back at other communities like the HIV community, and I've got cancer community, and I'll talk about them a little bit later. Where are we, the Alzheimer's community, in that?
I mean, I could just speak to my own experience, but we didn't really have a dementia community before I met Dementia Spring, and it's been a fabulous relationship and an extremely supportive one. But I think that the world beyond the dementia community is so hungry and in need of more stories, and they don't have to be the same kind of stories or the same kind of medium, but like so much more kind of taking this topic and bringing it out of the shadows. I mean, I think we're in a room right now with lots of people who are really invested in this community and have a lot of personal experiences, and I just think, just for me doing this project, just starting to talk about my own experiences with dementia and also about the disease period, like, it brought so many people in my life out of the woodwork who so needed to talk about it, who so needed resources, who so needed connection. There's just so much shame still around this disease, and I think I'm not coming from it as coming at this from somebody who's really embedded in the community. I'm coming really as an outsider who had a personal experience, and I can say that it's really important to me, given that experience, to bring this to those others who also feel like outsiders, because this thing is so isolating for people who are going through it. And I think media, film, art is like such an incredible touchstone for us when we feel alone. And so I think finding ways to talk about it, and finding ways that are all like not really sad or depressing, finding ways that are full of joy, finding ways that have like incredible cinematic value, like all of those things, we just need lots of touch points, I think.
I agree. I also think, one of the things, I think that we're it's interesting you mentioned the AIDS crisis, because I feel like we're in that crisis, like it's got a lot of similarities in terms of this is the beginning of a movement. This is the beginning of a movement to help, not even to help, to meet people with our vulnerability, with their vulnerability. And the only way that I can collaborate with somebody is by saying, there can't be a power imbalance, and there has to be like, we are both participants in this. And I think what I'm experiencing is that there's it's not just the person with dementia is the receiver of art. The person with dementia is an active participant and is not, so that's something that I would really like to see more of. I mean, I'm working with a brilliant poet who's just discovering that he's a poet. And I meet him where he's at, and he meets me, and how are you? How's your doctor's appointment? I'm a cancer survivor. And we talk about like what is meaning and purpose in our lives. I mean, so that is the thing, like how do we bring it out of the closet, although I don't want to conflate it with the LGBTQIA plus everything. But I think that there is this need of go further, go deeper, actually like ask complicated questions and ask them slowly.
Here. So again, if people have thoughts in the audience, questions they'd like to ask, we can take it for a minute or two. We're gonna take a break. First of all, you guys are amazing. We'll give a round of applause for this. I think without further ado, we'll take a break. Obviously, you guys are sticking around. We're gonna take about a 15-minute break. When we come back, we're gonna learn a little bit more about Katie through a video, and then we're gonna stream Dark Moon, which we're very excited about. And I just want to thank you all for being here. I think this room really speaks to what both of you have just said, right? Which is that the Alzheimer's community has a lot of folks who care very deeply about the arts. And when you think about the intersection of those two things, there's magic that happens. And you guys have proven that, and many people in the audience here who are with us, our artists, have proven that as well. And there's just not a lot of structures for that today, right? There's little things happening, pockets of things happening around the country, around the globe actually, and we've got to try to tap into that to try to make sure that the next artist who comes along who wants to tackle this subject and is intrigued by it has a place to go, has some resources, has mentors like yourselves to help them, has organizations like ours to try to guide them. And I just want to comment, the last comment I'll make is to your point, Katie, about not making all depictions of this disease with very, very familiar, fatalistic, negative tropes. It's very, very common. I'll talk about that a little bit after the break, but I have a lot of artists who say to me, I'm tired of seeing the same 5 images of dementia everywhere I look, because people with Alzheimer's disease and many dementias live longer than many people with cancer live. They live, longer than other people with other very difficult diseases that have a very welcoming, artistic, active community around those diseases, but not around ours. And it seems a little unfair. So, all right, with that, once again, thank you. Thanks to the two of you. You guys are awesome. And we'll reach at about